He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just stood there surrounded by raised voices, drawn weapons, and a silence that weighed more than the cuffs on his wrists. Malcolm Rivera had survived 3 deployments. He had stood in deserts where the ground trembled under mortar fire, carrying the wounded through blackouts of dust and rage. But nothing prepared him for how cold a country could feel when it looked at him and chose not to see the man and the match. The match is a threat. The match was a mistake. And still, he said nothing, because somewhere deep inside, he had learned that stillness wasn't surrender. It was survival. This isn't a story about an arrest. It's about what silence takes from a man, what he builds in its place. Now, let's get started. He hadn't been back a full week. 7 days earlier, Malcolm Rivera stepped off a plane at Des Moines International Airport, a duffel bag in one hand and a silence in his chest that hadn't left since Djibouti. For 3 years, he served with quiet distinction missions that never made the news, medals he never wore, nights too long for sleep and mornings too short for recovery. He didn't come home to parade, no welcome banners, no news vans, just a rusted Ford Fusion waiting in the long-term lot-and-a-half tank of gas. That was enough. That Monday afternoon, Malcolm pulled into Harrison's Stop and Go, a gas station tucked between a shuttered laundromat and an empty post office. He wasn't after anything special. Just needed black coffee and a protein bar. Something simple, something predictable, the kind of normal he hadn't tasted in years. The automatic doors hissed open. Cool air hit his face. For a moment, everything felt still. He walked past a teenage cashier scrolling on his phone, nodded politely, then headed for the snack aisle. He had earbuds in, but no music, just noise canceling, the kind that muffled the world enough to let him breathe. He never made it to the counter. A screech of tires outside shattered the quiet. 3 cruisers, lights blaring but no sirens, boxed in the front entrance. Malcolm turned instinctively. He recognized that kind of arrival. It wasn't a routine stop. Within seconds, the door flung open and voices barked commands. Hands up, now. Get on your knees. Don't move. Malcolm froze, hands still by his sides, heart suddenly pounding through the thin fabric of his hoodie. For a half-second, he thought maybe it wasn't him, maybe someone else. But the way their eyes locked onto him like he was already a headline told him otherwise. A voice inside him whispered, "Stay still. Breathe." That voice had kept him alive in darker places, so he obeyed. Slowly, deliberately, Malcolm set the energy drink in his hand back onto the shelf and raised his hands. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from shame, like something sacred had cracked inside. One of the officers shoved him to the ground. Asphalt scraped his knee through denim. A knee pressed into his spine. Metal dug into his wrists. He didn't resist. He couldn't. His breath caught in his throat as customers started filming. A woman covered her child's eyes. A man whispered something Malcolm couldn't hear. And then, the words, "He matches the description. Robbery suspect from last night. Same build, same beard." That's all it took. A vague match. A shadow they hadn't caught. A face that could be anyone. Except he wasn't anyone. He was Malcolm. Born in Boone. Played football for Roosevelt High. Served 3 tours. Had a mother who still sent him care packages and called him baby even though he was 33. But none of that mattered when you're seen as a threat before you're seen as a man. They didn't ask his name. Didn't check the military ID tucked behind his driver's license. Didn't ask where he was the night before. They had their narrative. He just happened to fit inside it. And in that moment, on that pavement, under the weight of accusation and public shame, Malcolm Rivera disappeared not physically, but invisibly. He stopped being real. He became a headline in the making. A risk to contain. They shoved him into the back seat of a cruiser. The plastic seat was cracked, the windows fogged from breath. He sat there, hands tight in cuffs, trying not to make eye contact with the officer driving. But he saw himself in the side mirror, jaw clenched, lips drawn tight, eyes searching for something he couldn't name. He didn't speak. Not because he didn't have words, But because the silence felt safer than the truth, at the precinct, they processed him like a number. No one said his name, just him and that guy and the match. His wallet was dropped in a plastic bin. His phone left at the counter was already buzzing with texts from his cousin. "You back home? Let's link up." He wouldn't reply. Not today. They took his fingerprints, his photo, his dignity. When he asked softly, "Can I call my mom?" the response came cold. "After we verify everything." He was led to a small cell. No clock, no bench, just 4 cinder block walls and the sour breath of old sweat. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality he wasn't ready for. In the silence, he sat, not out of choice, but because standing felt performative, like he was trying to prove something to people who'd already decided what he was. For the first time in a long time, Malcolm Rivera felt disposable. He wasn't in uniform, but he was still serving something. Only now, he was the sacrifice. And no one even noticed. The hours blurred. Malcolm didn't know how long he'd been in the cell. Could have been 4 hours. Could have been 12. There was no window, no ticking clock. Just the buzzing light overhead, the hum of a distant vending machine, and the occasional heavy footstep of a passing guard. He sat with his back against the wall, knees pulled in it to hide, but to conserve what little warmth was left in the concrete. His fingers traced the edge of his cargo pants, feeling the stiffness in his joints. The same knees that once carried him through sandstorms and steel hail in the Horn of Africa now ached from sitting still too long. No one had come to ask questions. No one had offered food or water. He wasn't being punished, but he wasn't being seen either. He wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't a civilian. He was something in between, shadow held in limbo. Somewhere in the silence, Malcolm thought about his mom. She didn't even know he was back yet. He'd planned to surprise her this weekend, bring her a scarf he picked up in Qatar, cook her oxtail the way she liked, watch old westerns on the living room couch while she gently fell asleep mid-plot, like always. Now she might find out from the news. Or worse, from someone's phone screen. His head dropped. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger needed oxygen. And here, all he had was stillness. What hurt more was the weight of it, the invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing minute, a burden no one else in the building could see. The kind you carry not because someone handed it to you, but because the world refused to look close enough to notice it existed. When a tray finally slid through the slot near the bottom of the door, it came with no words, just a thud, cold eggs, a stale biscuit, and a half-empty cup of water. No utensils. He didn't touch it. The idea of eating under these fluorescent lights, like some forgotten animal in a cage, made his stomach twist. Instead, he stood slowly. His joints popped, his back cracked in 2 places, but he stayed upright, leaning against the wall as if defiance could be expressed in posture alone. A younger guard passed by once, glanced into the room, and paused. Their eyes met for just a second. The guard hesitated, something like recognition flickered but then moved on without a word. That brief look, though, stayed with Malcolm. He wasn't sure if it was a pity, or guilt, or shame. But it meant something, because at least it meant he wasn't invisible to everyone. Still, the hours kept dragging. The silence, once numbing, became deafening. Memories crept in where questions should have been. Images of buddies lost, operations that turned on a single breath, nights spent cleaning gear while praying for letters from home. And those missions, God, those missions where nothing went according to plan, and you had to pretend like everything was fine because leadership needed calm, not truth. This was worse, because here the mission was gone. And still, no one wanted to hear his truth. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't with ceremony. Just a click. A detective with thinning hair and a voice that sounded like gravel said, "Let's go." Still cuffed, Malcolm was led down a hallway with peeling paint and the soft buzz of old cameras. He passed other cells, other men. A few nodded. One whispered, "Stay strong." They brought him into a narrow room table bolted to the floor, camera in the corner blinking like a heartbeat. The detective across from him didn't seem cruel, just tired, worn. "Name's Harris," he said, not bothering to shake hands. "They're saying you were picked up for matching a suspect. I've reviewed the tape." Malcolm said nothing. He wanted to ask which tape. The surveillance one? The phone video now circulating online? The moment they ignored his ID? But he stayed quiet. Harris sighed, then pulled out a photo. The suspect in question, a grainy image from a gas station robbery in Ankeny. The man had a hoodie, a beard, and that was about it. No distinct tattoos, no visible scars, not even a clear jawline. "That's not me," Malcolm said finally. "I know," Harris replied. "That's why we're releasing you. No apology. Just paperwork. Just procedure. Like the arrest hadn't cost him anything. Like the silence hadn't done damage." Back in the hallway, he passed the same guard from earlier. This time, the young man nodded fully, respectfully, like he knew. Malcolm nodded back. Not out of forgiveness, but because acknowledgement, no matter how small, was something. At the front desk, they returned his wallet, now scuffed. His phone, which someone had dropped off. His name was wiped from the system. No record. No charges. Just a blank space where a life-altering moment should have been documented. He asked once more, "Will there be a report?" The clerk didn't look up. "You were never officially arrested." As if that made it disappear. He stepped out into the parking lot with the same duffel bag he'd arrived with, but nothing felt the same. The Iowa sky stretched wide above him. The air was clean, clear. But it didn't fill his lungs the same way. There's a difference between breathing and feeling alive. And at that moment, Malcolm wasn't sure which one he was doing. Malcolm didn't sleep that night. He laid on his couch in silence, fully clothed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling of his one-bedroom apartment. His wrists still ached. Not from the pressure of the cuffs, but from the imprint they left, deep purple ridges that pulsed every time his heart beat. His phone sat untouched on the coffee table, buzzing every few minutes. When he finally checked it, the screen was overflowing. Texts, missed calls, mentions. His cousin Jay had sent a dozen messages. "Bro, this you? That video, wild. Everyone's talking about it." The video. He hadn't watched it, but he did now. It was only 42 seconds, shot vertically, shaky, but clear enough. There he was, hands up, calm, still, no yelling, no resistance, just quiet compliance. And still, they shoved him down. Still, they cuffed him. The voice of a young woman, maybe the one holding the phone, could be heard in the background. "He said he's military. They didn't even check." It wasn't anger that hit him, not exactly. It was something colder, more precise, a recognition of how easy it was to be erased. He scrolled through the comments, hundreds by then. They didn't even ask questions. "This man stayed calm. That's terrifying. I served. This is different." But one comment made him pause. "My brother trained under him in Djibouti. This man is the real deal." That was someone who knew him. Within hours, the post was shared to a subreddit for veterans, then to a Facebook group called Silent Ranks, then to Twitter, then TikTok. The algorithm ate it alive. And that's when the messages began to change. Not just outrage, but defense. A former student of his from field training in 2019, Senior Airman Kayla Jensen, wrote a detailed thread. "This man once held back fire until our evac was clear. I owe him more than I've ever said." She tagged veteran advocacy groups, Des Moines local press, and finally someone unexpected. Brigadier General Russell Shaw. No one knew if Shaw would respond. He was known for avoiding headlines, staying apolitical, sticking to mission prep and logistics. But 2 days later, Malcolm received a knock at his door. It wasn't press. It wasn't police. It was a man in uniform. Older, poised, the kind of stillness that only came from decades in the field. He introduced himself, quietly, firmly. "I'm General Shaw. "May I come in?" Malcolm nodded. They didn't talk much that day, not at first. But Shaw left behind a typed letter, short, official. At the bottom was a signature, and a sentence that would carry weight far beyond that living room. "If this can happen to you, it can happen to anyone under my command, and that is unacceptable." By the end of the week, Malcolm received a formal notice. He'd be appearing at Polk County Courthouse for a hearing to review procedure. He didn't ask for it, didn't request charges to be dropped, they already were. But General Shaw had. And when a general speaks, people listen. The day of the hearing, Malcolm wore his dress blues, pressed, perfect, the same ones he hadn't touched since the memorial for his former CO. His mother, Mrs. Rivera, stood beside him outside the courthouse. She didn't ask questions. She just placed a hand on his back and whispered, "Stand tall, baby." Inside the courtroom, it was quiet, sparse. A few community members, a few law students, one teenage girl holding a notebook, Tasha, the one who filmed the video. She didn't wave. She just nodded once. He nodded back. Then the back doors opened, and in walked Brigadier General Russell Shaw in full dress uniform. The room held its breath. He approached the bench, asked permission to speak. The judge, clearly caught off guard, nodded. Shaw's voice was calm, unshakable. "I've served with thousands, trained hundreds, but few have carried themselves with the quiet strength Staff Sergeant Rivera has. What happened wasn't just a misstep, it was a fracture in the trust between service and society. We ask these men and women to protect us overseas. We owe them more than silence when they return." The judge looked stunned. The bailiff paused his note-taking. Even the court stenographer glanced up. Malcolm didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink. But something cracked in his chest, not pain, not pride. Validation. After the hearing, outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. Microphones, cameras, flashbulbs. Malcolm said only one sentence. "I didn't ask for this, but now that it's here, I hope we don't waste it." That was it. That's all he gave. But it was enough. Because at that moment, everyone saw him not just as a man in a uniform, but as a mirror. The clip of Shaw's courtroom statement aired on local news that night, but it wasn't until it was uploaded by an independent military YouTube channel that it exploded. Veterans started commenting. Civil rights groups started sharing. Students used it in classroom discussions. And then something shifted. A JROTC counselor from Lincoln High School in Des Moines sent Malcolm a message. Some of our students saw the video. A few now question if service is worth it. Could you come talk to them? Nothing formal. Just show them what truth looks like. Malcolm stared at the message for hours. He didn't consider himself a speaker. He didn't want attention. But he also knew what it meant to go unseen for too long. That Friday, he showed up. Same blues. Boots shined. Voice steady. He stood in front of 30 teenager chaff, distracted, half skeptical, and told them, "You don't need to be a hero to stand still. Sometimes not running is enough." Malcolm didn't return to the courthouse. He didn't give interviews. He ignored the speaking invitations, turned down the podcast offers, and left emails from national outlets unread. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying not to be defined. Because he knew what came next. In stories like his, outrage, headlines, hashtags, and then forgetfulness. He didn't want to be alone. He wanted to be something quieter, deeper, something that lasted. So he went home, washed his uniform, folded it with the same care he used in the field, then put it away, back in the closet. Not to hide it, but to remind himself he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something more now. That Monday, he called the school counselor who'd reached out earlier. "Do they have a space for JROTC drills?" A pause then. "We've got a dusty gym." "That'll do." And just like that, Malcolm Rivera began showing up. Twice a week, at 7:15 a.m. sharp, he'd unlock the back doors of Lincoln High's gym. He'd drag out the worn mats, set up water bottles, stand in the center of that linoleum floor like it was a runway in Kandahar. The kids came at first, just a few. Mostly the ones too curious or too angry to stay away. But word spread. Something about him made them show up early, even when it rained. He didn't lecture. He didn't talk about the arrest, the video, or the general's speech. He talked about breath control. About how the most powerful moment in any confrontation is the pause. He showed them how to read a room, how to see without reacting, how to command respect without raising your voice. The stuff nobody puts on a resume, the stuff that keeps you alive and just in combat, but in classrooms, traffic stops, job interviews. He taught them how to stand still, how to step forward, and most of all, how to choose restraint over retaliation. And slowly, they started to mirror him. Not the uniform, not the history, but the presence. There was one boy, Elijah, who used to slouch so deep you'd think his spine had quit. After 3 sessions, he stood with his chin up barely, but it stayed there. There was a girl named Samira who'd been sent to detention twice for attitude. Now she led morning warm-ups. No yelling, just a quiet command. She once told Malcolm, "People don't mess with you when you don't flinch." He smiled and said nothing, but that night, he wrote it down. Around that same time, a call came from the Riverview Youth Center, a juvenile facility on the east side. The director, Mrs. Webb, had heard about what Malcolm was doing at Lincoln. "Most of our boys have been cuffed before they ever saw a uniform," she said. "You think you could stop by? No cameras, just you." He said yes, without thinking. When he arrived, the place was half-painted and smelled of cafeteria food and broken pencils. The boys in the room weren't interested in role models. They crossed their arms, rolled their eyes, dared him to try. Malcolm didn't push. He just stood there and said, "I got cuffed last month at a gas station." Didn't run. Didn't yell. Still ended up face down. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was, nobody said anything. That got their attention. Because they knew what silence felt like. They lived in it every day. So when he told them how guilt festers in your ribs, how rage can make your hands shake in the middle of the night, and how sometimes you walk around ready to explode and nobody knows because nobody asks, they listened. One of them, a wiry kid named Dion, asked, "So what, you just forgave him?" Malcolm shook his head. "Nah, forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I didn't forgive them. I just refused to carry their failure like it was my identity." That landed hard. They didn't clap, but they leaned in. And from that day, Malcolm returned every other Wednesday. No schedule, no agenda, just presence. Some days he spoke. Other days, he just passed out notebooks and asked them to write things they'd never say out loud. Most of them didn't write anything the first time, but they kept the notebooks. Outside of those spaces, Malcolm remained quiet. But the world didn't stop watching. Clips of his visit to the high school, filmed by students, kept circulating. One showed him saying, "You don't have to shout to be strong. Sometimes standing still is louder than anything else." That one hit a nerve. It made its way into classrooms, workshops, even a leadership summit in Chicago. A veteran from Mississippi commented, "I've buried brothers with medals. Never seen one weaponize silence like that. That's power." The town began to shift, too. At the local grocery store, someone placed a note under his windshield. "Thank you for not yelling back." At the community center, a mother hugged him after practice. Her daughter, Aaliyah, had stopped skipping school. "She says it's because you notice when she's missing," the mother said. He didn't know how to answer that, so he just nodded. But later that night, he wrote in his notebook, "Sometimes dignity sounds like, 'I see you.'" Back at home, his mother kept a photo on the fridge. It wasn't from the courtroom. It was from that first day at Lincoln High. He didn't know she'd printed it. She never showed it to guests. Just left it there, quiet and proud. One evening, as they folded laundry together, white towels and old t-shirts, she asked, "You feel like yourself again?" He thought for a long moment. The clock ticked behind them. The dryer hummed. Finally, he said, "No. I feel like someone I used to want to become." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Sometimes the quietest strength leaves the loudest legacy. Malcolm didn't rebuild by proving anyone wrong. He rebuilt by standing still, holding on to what was right. And in doing so, he became a room others could grow inside. If this story reminded you of someone or helped you see yourself a little clearer, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. And if you believe in stories that heal, not just hurt, we'd love for you to subscribe and stay connected. Your voice matters here. I'm not what they did to me. I'm what I kept choosing after. Stay tuned.